So I recognize this may not be one of the most exciting moments of your whole week, but it is mine. It genuinely is. It's one of the times I look forward to, and I get excited about this moment and just our worship time together. Last week, we talked about being with God as opposed, not against doing, but that out of our being with God flows doing. So I gave you this little diagram in your sermon notes, and we talked about it. So how, and I just want you to ponder, okay? This is just a reminder. How did being affect your life this last week in terms of God? How did it affect it? So you hold that, and hopefully as we talk this morning, you can reflect, because it ties into literally everything we do in our faith, in life. And by the way, if you need that little chart, just ask the office and we'll get it. It's instructional, informative of what God is up to. I want to invite you to take your sermon note sheet. After the service, there is this time downstairs of reflecting, of chewing, of thinking, of where you disagree or you agree, time with Craig Rapay and others. So it's downstairs, you get coffee and a couple cookies, and then you talk and think. So I just want to remind you of that. It's a good time. On November 30th, 2011, I don't know what you were doing there, but there was an article that appeared in a magazine and actually a newspaper just outside of Salt Lake City, okay? And in that article, it talked about a duck hunter, in an accident he had the previous Saturday, approximately 11:30 in the morning. He had stepped out of his boat to set his decoys. He left his dog in the boat, his loaded 12-gauge shotgun. And as he was putting out those ducks, this is what happened. According to Sheriff's Deputy Kevin Potter, the dog did something, and the gun was discharged, loosening 27 buckshot pellets into the buttocks of the owner. After this happened, the article continues to say that the deputy would not speculate on the motivation of the dog. Couldn't believe they said that. Or how, because the hunter promised the safety was on the gun, how in the world the dog turned the safety off. The sheriff's deputy then said also that the owner was not going to press charges against his dog, nor would the owner of the dog release his name. At the end of the article, it indicated that now the hunter had trust issues with his dog. Okay? Trust is a delicate thing, right? And I tell you what, if this is the way they start their marriage, it can only go up, and there is incredible trust, isn't there? Incredible, but it's delicate. And the truth is that you and I are often one of two people, and there's hybrids, of course. There are those of us that trust, and then you have to prove us wrong, right? Some of you are like that. You just trust. Others of you, you've got to prove before I'll trust. And we're in those two places. A couple of years ago, Deanna and I went and visited our son Stephen, and this is his wife Heather, in Johnson City, Tennessee. Johnson City, Tennessee. We flew into Atlanta, and then we traveled up. We traveled through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all the way to the most northeastern tip of Tennessee, which is there's not much, it goes east and west, right? But there's a northeastern tip of Tennessee. And as we were driving, by the way, if you know me very well, you know I'm directionally challenged. That's just who I am. I believe one of the reasons I married my wife, Deanna, is because she is not. It's a gift she has. So we drove I-85, I-75, I-225, I-25, a bunch of other 5s, and 26. That's what we drove. And all that way, I was trusting, and I forgot my phone's in my office. I should have brought it. I was trusting my iPhone and Siri, telling me where to turn, which way to go, where not to go. And you know what? Siri was almost 100% right, except for construction. When there were construction moments, that was a little bit challenging. You know, Siri, because of all the work people have done with that app, sees the big picture, right? Can direct you where you need to go, where you need to turn. John Geiter just saw a little bit in front of him, and that's it. And you know, the challenging part was when we came up to construction and a sign said this way and Siri said this way. That was one of the problematic moments. Life can be really good, but it also can be very challenging, right? And by the way, if you're not in the challenging moment, it will happen. It's just part of our predicament. God, he sees the big picture, doesn't he? He sees the big picture, and me, I just see what's right in front of me, and when God says you need to go this direction, and I see something else, there's this argument that goes on inside of me. You ever had those arguments? Yeah. It's part of who we are. What will I do? Will I trust God? Now, by the way, Siri gets it right most of the time. God gets it right all the time. That's been my experience. Some of you remember memorizing Psalms 9:10, which came to me yesterday that I should have had it in the PowerPoint, but you'll just have to trust me. Some of you know it. Those who know your name trust in you. For you, Lord, anybody finish this for me? For you, Lord, never forsake those who seek you. That's God's promise. And I've had it. It's been true. Actually, it's been 100% true in my life. 100%. God, folks, is up to something bigger and better than what you and I can see, than what we see staring at us. So we're 3 weeks into Lent today. We have 3 more weeks. Our first, and by the way, Lent is meant to slow us down in order to pay attention to God as we come to Holy Week. That's one of the goals of Lent and what it does. So our first week of Lent, we talked about a father who is in desperation coming to Jesus, who says, I believe you, Jesus, help my unbelief. You remember that story? And then Jesus does exactly what the father asked, healing his son. Last week, we talked about Mary and Martha, and Martha began to learn, and it's a journey of learning, that out of our being with God flows the doing, okay? Out of our being with God flows the doing. And today, we're on Mary and Martha part 2 with a twist, okay? So we're in John 11, so we're going to find ourselves, but in John 10, what we discover is it's winter. It's the last winter Jesus will have on earth. It is the time of Hanukkah. Jesus has been in Jerusalem teaching, and up to this point, he's been very elusive with the religious leaders, saying who he is, but they say point blank, who do you say you are, Jesus, in front of all these folks in the temple? And he tells them, I'm the Son of God. And several things happen immediately. One is many people believe, but the other is the religious leaders pick up stones because Jesus is calling himself God. And Jesus and the disciples, they flee. They actually flee 20 miles east of Jerusalem to the Dead Sea area. And that's kind of how our story begins in John 11. So it says this. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother, Lazarus, was sick. So the 2 sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend is very sick. But when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, you got to hang on to that phrase right there, right? Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened, Jesus continued, for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. So although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But his disciples objected. Rabbi, they said, only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going to go there again? Jesus replied, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night there is danger of stumbling because they have no light. Then he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up. I love the disciples. This is so great. The disciples said, Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll soon get better. They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping. But Jesus meant Lazarus has died. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. And Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too and die with Jesus. You know, Mary and Martha, they send word, don't they, to Jesus. Your friend Lazarus, and it literally says, whom you love, he's sick and he is dying. What was their hope? What was their desire and dream at that moment? That Jesus would come. He would come immediately and as fast as possible. What does Jesus do? He waits 2 days. He waits 2 days. You know, sometimes God's timing is so crystal clear and so beautiful, and I get it. Other times, it's challenging. It's complicated. It isn't what I want or what I see, but it's still what he's doing. For the disciples, there's this confusion, right? As Jesus maybe isn't totally clear, but then he is, and he clarifies that Lazarus has died. And I love that he tells them it's good we weren't there because your faith is going to change. It's going to grow deeper because we weren't there. You know, what are the disciples' hopes and dreams and desires in this moment? Mary and Martha, what do they want? They want Jesus to come yesterday, and the disciples want Jesus not to go there because they're afraid that something tragic is going to happen, because we know Bethany is just a mere 2 miles from Jerusalem. And you got to love Thomas. I do. I love Thomas in a very cynical sort of way. Just saying, let's go to and we'll die with Jesus, okay? We'll just go. It's going to be really a bummer, you guys. That's Thomas. Verse 17 says this. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. That's an amazing statement of faith, isn't it? So they arrive, the disciples and Jesus, and what they hear is mourning and grief. Literally the sound of people experiencing someone else's death in a sense. And there's this weeping. You know, it's not 11:59, Jesus is there in the nick of time, is it? It's more like 11 or 12:59, Jesus, where in the world were you? That's Martha's response, and she kind of goes after Jesus, doesn't she? If only you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I don't think it's a bit of anger, but it's certainly frustration and disappointment. You ever found yourself disappointed with God? Because it's 12:59 instead of 11:59? I think we've all found ourselves there. Jesus says in verse 23, your brother will rise again. And Martha's response is, yes, he'll rise when everyone else rises at the last day. And what she's talking about there is a common understanding, a theology. Theology is our understanding of God. So literally every person in the world has theology. May not be what we would think is correct, but everybody has theology. So Mary's comes from the Pharisees, which they taught that at the end of time when God comes back, everyone will be resurrected in some fashion, those that follow God. But you know, it's so interesting. Jesus means something entirely different, doesn't he? Because he's talking about now, not the future. He's talking about now as far as the resurrection. Jesus goes on in verse 25. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this, Martha? And she responds, yes, Lord, she told him. I have always believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God. So we call this the doctrine of resurrection, right? That's what we call it. That's we get this amazing dialogue between Martha and Jesus here. The doctrine of resurrection, which we often think is future, and it's not just a doctrine, though. What it is, it's a person. It's found in Jesus, the Son of God, who's literally come to rescue us. And it's literally what Martha and Mary and Lazarus are going to experience in just a moment. And when Jesus says, I am the resurrection, I am is what God told Moses was his name, clear back at the burning bush. Remember that? I am who I am. Some of you resonate with that. He's saying, I am who I am right here. I am the God who created everything you see, Martha. I am greater than death. And the word for believe is this word called pisteuo. Pisteuo. It means to place trust in, to entrust oneself to commit oneself to. It actually comes up. So do you see the nature of it? It's not just saying, I believe, but it's, I believe and I'm going to change because of that belief. Trust is not just something we assent to in our minds. It's something we find ourselves doing. This word pisteuo actually appears 6 times in this little passage we're reading this morning. John loves this word, who wrote this. It comes up 52 times in his gospel, pisteuo. And I know it's going to be nerdy right now, but it actually is the idea of seeing something ahead. And it's a present active verb. That's my nerdiness for you. I'm terrible at grammar, but I learned this. Present active verb means it's now, but it's ongoing. It's happening now, and it's a verb, so verbs always do something, right? It's what they do. So, I know that was ridiculous, but that's still the point. If I say I believe in Jesus with pisteuo, but I do nothing, I don't really believe. Okay? Because believe does something. It's trusting. It's trusting. And Martha literally was being asked these next questions that are going to be coming up on the screen. Martha, do you believe God loves you enough to want the best for you? That's what Jesus is asking. It's under the surface, but it's right there. God, Martha, do you believe God loves you enough to do what's best for you? Martha, do you believe God is wise enough to know what is best for you? So Martha, do you believe God loves you enough? Is he wise enough? And then lastly, Martha, do you believe God is strong enough to protect you as you follow his best for your life? Those are on your sermon notes, by the way, on the back sheet. You have to sit with these questions, by the way. You can easily just answer them as fast as you want, but to be truthful, they are so deep. Because, Martha, do you believe I came late, but it's going to be okay? That's what he's asking. Do you think that these are true? So do you and I trust Jesus when it's 12:59? Because he loves us enough, he's wise enough, he's strong enough for our best, which I'm not always sure I know. We continue, verse 28. Then Jesus returned, then she, Martha, returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, the teacher is here and wants to see you. So Mary immediately went to him. Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him. When the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. You know, when you stop to think about the faith that Mary and Martha had, it was quite amazing, wasn't it? That Jesus had the strength, the power, the love, the care, the wisdom to have healed her brother before he died. Now, verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. Where have you put him? He asked them, and they told him, Lord, come and see. Then Jesus wept. And the people who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him. But some said, the man healed a blind man. Could he not have kept Lazarus from dying? You know, Mary is understandably upset, right? Just like her sister. It's interesting that she uses the exact same words of her sister. If only you had come. If only you had come, things would be different. You know, it's really hard to embrace God's plan when ours is right in front of us and it's not going the way we want it to go. It's challenging to let go of, if only you had been there, to you are God and you know, and I will trust you. Does that make sense to you? Hard. And in this case, it's truly Jesus letting go of, if only you had been there, because you are Messiah, which Mary and Martha believed. You are God's Son, which Mary and Martha believed. You literally are the creator of the universe, Jesus. The final answer is not always what we think the final answer is. Because you see, there's something after, even death. I am the resurrection, Jesus said, and the life. In verse 33, it tells us that Jesus became angry as they walked to the tomb. And when Jesus gets angry, we need to pay attention because it doesn't happen all that often that we're told. So we have to notice. And some people have said that Jesus was angry at the doubting of the people. I'm not sure what the people were doubting because only Mary and Martha had conversation with Jesus, right? About what was going on. This is what I think, and this comes from other folks as well, from reading and thinking. I think Jesus was angry at death. I think he was angry at death. And because death brings pain, it brings hopelessness. It brings the belief that we have no power over it, that we are frail and we are weak before it. No answer. And now, Jesus, he starts to weep as well. So he's angry, and now he begins to weep. And he weeps over Mary and Martha and the people and Lazarus. And I really believe Jesus weeps with you and me in our moments of pain. When all of this comes crashing down on us. And literally, it's because he loves us. We read in Hebrews 2, 14 and 15 these words. Notice them. They're very amazing words. Because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son, this is Jesus, also becomes flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he, notice this, break the power of the devil who had the power over death. Only in this way could he set us free, all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. Isn't that interesting language? Everyone experiences the fear of dying. It's part of who we are. Jesus has come to change that. And I hope you notice what he breaks. He breaks the power of the devil. He breaks the power of death that we might be free. And that is exactly what he's doing in this story. Folks, it's foretelling, the story is foretelling what's going to happen just a few weeks away at Easter. It is literally the future bursting into the present. That is our God. So we continue reading. Verse 38 in John 11. Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested. Lord, he's been dead for 4 days and the smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? That's the word pisteuo, if you trust. So they rolled the stone away. Jesus then looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of these people standing here so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out! And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Folks, it's so uncomfortable what Jesus asked them to do, roll the stone away. Martha, I get, right? It's 4 days, Jesus. It's not a great request. But remember, God always has the bigger and better plan. Always. Regardless of what I see, regardless of what we see, God's plan, it's the bigger and it's the better. And I love that he tells Martha, remember, Martha, what I said in private. If you pisteuo, if you believe, you will see God's glory. And then Jesus prays this amazing prayer. I think it's just amazing. Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. And I want you to understand it's true of you and me as well. Do you know that? Every time we pray, God hears. And he does for us what is the very best, though it is challenging, as we've been talking. Because the Father, as Jesus is praying, you always love me enough. You always care for me enough. You're always wise enough. You're always strong enough. And then the stone is rolled away and these literally death-shattering words, Lazarus, come out! And you know, as death encounters Jesus, there's like a short circuit. There's a power failure. It's almost like death is meeting its own death in this moment. Looking ahead to what Easter is about, but it happens right here because Lazarus comes walking out dressed like a mummy. It must have been so terrifying, right? Wouldn't you be afraid just a little bit if this happened in front of you? Oh my goodness. And somebody said maybe the second miracle is Lazarus could even walk because he's just embalmed in this material, and that he could even breathe through that head wrapping. And then Jesus, because the people are so stunned, he has to tell them to let him out. Cut away that material, or we're going to have another death, and we'll have to do this all over again, right? If you're not careful. Folks, Jesus hijacks a funeral. He hijacks a funeral and makes it into a celebration, a party. That God's plans are bigger and better than our plans. And the faith of the disciples, he was so correct when he said it's so good that we're not going when Mary and Martha want us, because your faith, your pistuo, your trust in me, it's going to grow. It's going to become bigger than it was. And it does. And Jesus, we just have to hear this. He never intended to just heal Lazarus, right? Never. He intended to raise him from the dead. That's what he meant to do. And what happens now is word travels. and people are believing Jesus in amazing sort of ways, but word travels. And the Jewish Sanhedrin, those folks that are in charge of Israel spiritually, they're even more terrified of Jesus. Terrified. And now not only are they planning on killing Jesus, but they're planning on killing Lazarus a second time. That's what's going to be that's in their plans. God's plans, they're always bigger and better than John Geiter's. They're always bigger and better than ours. Though we can't always see, don't always understand, but they are. Last Sunday, there was a young man named Jordan Bohannon. He came to the free throw line for the University of Iowa. The score was tied, or not tied, it was Iowa was ahead of Northwestern 77-70. Now this is what you need to know about Jordan. He had made 34 consecutive free throws, okay? Throughout the season, not in that game. Throughout the season, 34 consecutive free throws, and now he was tied with a young man named Chris Street. Chris Street had set this record in 1993. 3 days later, after setting that record of 34 free throws in a row, he died in a car accident. Never to, obviously, play basketball again. The school actually retired his number, which is 40, and it's actually in their stadium. You can see it. And then they created an award called the Chris Street Award. It was for any Iowa player, and they coveted this award, who would show the passion that Chris had for playing basketball. So, Jordan, he's up at the free throw line, and he knows what he's going to do. See, he's already had some amazing counsel from his parents and his two brothers who also played basketball in college, but then he also talked to God. And this is what Jordan did. He intentionally missed. It was ugly. It was just he did it intentionally. And he didn't care what the score was. He didn't care even the outcome of the game, although later he said he and God had this conversation where God just sort of said, trust me, and Jordan did, and they won still. I'm not sure God always cares about that. But this is what Jordan said at the end of the article. It wasn't my record to have. Life is bigger than basketball. Now, I want you to know, there are a number of folks that would have called him crazy, even ridiculous, that he would give up his fame and glory, right? That Jordan's record would stay intact, but he had God's bigger and better plan. But there was something bigger than just this record for himself, that he would let Chris Street keep his own record. Jesus, folks, he's calling us to live his bigger and better plan. We don't always understand it. I get that fully. And he calls us to pisteuo, to trust him, to follow him, to walk with him. People are going to call us crazy following Jesus' bigger and better plan at times. Sometimes they'll get it. Other times they won't, just like the disciples and Mary and Martha, not getting it until looking backwards. You know, do you think Mary and Martha were upset now after the fact that Jesus didn't come when he came? I don't think so at all. I think they were very pleased because, see, they didn't get a healed, old Lazarus. They got a new, resurrected Lazarus. Different kind of thing. I don't think they mind one bit that Jesus did not come at 11:59, but he came at 12:29. Now, I'm not minimizing when we're in the midst of that, because that is really hard. And we all face those situations. But God's promise is, I've got the bigger and the better plan. And it requires, folks, it requires that we wrestle with those three questions. Do I believe God loves me enough to want the best for me? Do I? Do I believe God is wise enough to know what is best for me? No matter what I see, do I believe God is strong enough to protect me as I follow his best for my life? Psalms 9:10, David, those who know your name, they trust in you. They trust in you, for you've never forsaken those who seek you. Folks, Jesus ultimately doesn't just want to resuscitate your life. He wants to resurrect it. Okay? That's part of his bigger, better plan. And the call of resurrection means you have to die. And what death means to us is different than what Lazarus experienced. It's not a physical death. It is giving up our will and trusting that God can actually do this in our lives. That's what resurrection means for us now. Later on, it will be new bodies going to a new place. But for now, it's surrendering my will to God. Your plans, Lord, they're bigger and better, and I'm going to follow them come hell or high water. That's where God calls us to walk. We sang it in that Ocean song, didn't we? He calls me to go where I've never been, and he's there already waiting. You know, the amazing irony of my sort of friend Jordan Bohannon in Iowa is that when he gave up the glory of that record, he actually got more glory because now we know his story. See, if he had made that 35th free throw, it's not that big of a record for so many other folks who have done more than that. But the fact is, we hardly ever hear of somebody missing a free throw to save someone else's glory. In other words, he served this dead man named Chris Street, and it was a beautiful thing. You know, the great thing about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' story, Jesus does not give them what they want. He gives them something better. And that is true for you and me as well. Let's be quiet and listen. Listen to our God who wants to resurrect us, not resuscitate us.